He had nothing, no home, no money, no certainty of tomorrow, but he had a dream and a little boy who believed in him. The Pursuit of Happyness follows Chris Gardner's fight to rise from rock bottom, proving that even when life breaks you down, hope can build you back up. So let's dive straight in. The movie starts in San Francisco in 1981. Chris Gardner sells medical devices for a living. Every morning, he drops off his young son Christopher at daycare before heading to different hospitals to try to sell his machines. He needs to sell at least one every month just to get by, but most doctors think the device is too expensive and unnecessary. Because of this, his wife, Linda, has to pick up their son from daycare after working double shifts, which makes her even more stressed. One evening, Chris sees a Rubik's Cube and decides to try solving it. Linda asks him about their taxes, but he admits he still hasn't paid them, which upsets her even more before she leaves for work. Later, Chris keeps working on the cube and finds it fairly easy to solve. The next day, while walking on the street, Chris notices a man stepping out of a fancy car. Curious, he asks what the man does for a living, and the man says he's a stockbroker. Chris assumes it must require a lot of education, but the man says it doesn't, just good math and social skills. The next morning, Chris tells Linda he plans to apply for a job as a stockbroker. She laughs it off, saying they can't afford to take such risks since they already owe 2 months' rent. When he goes to apply at a brokerage firm, he leaves one of his medical devices with a street performer outside because he doesn't want to carry it in. While he's inside, he sees the performer running off with it. Chris runs after him, but fails to catch the thief. The following day, Chris promises Linda he'll sell his remaining devices soon. On the way to work, he drops off Christopher at daycare and points out how the word happiness is misspelled on the wall as happiness. He laughs about it with his son and then goes to deliver his job application to a man named Jay Twistle at the brokerage firm. Jay is in a hurry, so their conversation is quick. As Chris leaves the building, he spots the same performer who stole his device. He chases them through the streets, eventually catching up and getting his machine back. When he returns home, Linda sees he still has 2 unsold devices and gets even more frustrated. A few days later, Chris runs into Jay again while he's trying to hail a taxi. Jay doesn't have time to talk, so Chris quickly says he's heading in the same direction and joins him in the cab. Inside, Jay is focused on solving a Rubik's Cube, so Chris offers to show him how it's done. Jay doesn't believe he can, but Chris manages to solve it before the ride ends, which impresses Jay. However, Jay gets out and leaves Chris to pay the fare. Unable to afford it, Chris runs away and catches a train, but loses one of his machines in the process. That night, he calls Linda to apologize for being late, but she's furious. She says she's tired and that she and Christopher are leaving. When Chris gets home, they're gone. Just then, Jay calls and asks him to take down a number so they can talk the next day. With no pen or paper around, Chris memorizes it and rushes to a store to write it down before he forgets. The next day, Chris finds Linda dropping off their son at daycare. She tells him she's not happy anymore, and Chris tells her she can leave, but not take their son. Linda agrees and leaves for good, while Chris keeps Christopher with him. That night, their landlord shows up asking for rent. Chris begs for more time and promises to paint the apartment himself. The landlord agrees to let them stay 10 more days. The next morning, while Chris is painting, 2 policemen knock on the door and take him to the station for unpaid parking tickets. He pays the fine, but the officer tells him he has to stay overnight until the payment clears. The next morning, Chris rushes straight from jail to his interview at Dean Witter. He doesn't have time to change, so he shows up in the same paint-stained clothes from the day before. The interviewers are surprised by his appearance, but Chris tells them honestly that he was arrested for unpaid tickets. At first, they seem unimpressed, but his honesty and sense of humor win them over, and by the end, everyone is laughing. After the interview, Jay tells him he did great and that they'll be in touch. But when Chris learns the internship is unpaid, he hesitates. Jay encourages him to take the opportunity anyway, saying it could lead to something bigger. Later, Chris goes home and waits for Linda to bring back their son. That night, she finally arrives with Christopher and tells Chris she's moving to New York to work as a waitress. Chris agrees to let her go, but insists that Christopher stay with him. Believing that Chris can take care of their son, Linda says goodbye and leaves. Later, Chris manages to sell one of his medical devices to a hospital, finally earning some money. The next day, he starts his unpaid internship at the brokerage firm, learning how the business works. During a lunch break, he runs into one of the firm's senior executives, Mr. Frome. While talking to him, Chris spots a man carrying his old medical device, the one he lost earlier while running from the taxi driver. He chases after the man, but ends up getting hit by a car. Luckily, he's not badly hurt, but he loses one of his shoes and has to return to the office with just one on. The internship is tough. Chris is constantly told to run errands and gets no respect. He struggles to make sales calls, so he decides to skip the smaller clients and go straight to the company's CEO, Mr. Ribbon. He actually gets a meeting set up, but just as he's about to leave for it, his boss asks him to move his car. By the time he's done, he's missed the meeting. That night, Chris takes his son to a diner and tells him they'll be going on a trip tomorrow, hinting that it might include a football game to cheer him up. The next morning, they go to Mr. Ribbon's house so Chris can apologize for missing the meeting. Mr. Ribbon turns out to be friendly and even invites them to the football game since he's heading there with his own son. At the stadium, Chris chats with Mr. Ribbon and some other businessmen. Mr. Ribbon tells him he likes him, but can't accept his business offer. Later, Chris spots his missing medical device again and finally retrieves it. Unfortunately, when he tries to sell it, he learns it's broken. A hospital agrees to pay for it once it's fixed, but for now, he's out of luck. When he and his son return to the motel, they find all their belongings outside. They've been kicked out for not paying rent. With nowhere else to go, Chris and his son wander the streets and eventually end up at a train station. To comfort his son, Chris pretends their broken medical device is a time machine. They travel back to the time of dinosaurs, playing along with the idea until they find shelter in a public bathroom. That night, as his son sleeps, Chris quietly cries, realizing how low things have gotten. The next day, they try to stay at a homeless shelter, but the first one only allows women and children. They rush to another shelter just in time to get a spot for the night. Inside, Chris works on fixing his broken machine while studying for his internship exams. He adjusts his work routine so he can finish client calls earlier and make it to the shelter line on time each evening. Over the next few days, we see Chris juggling work, parenting, and survival. He studies at night while his son sleeps, helps him with homework, and keeps trying to stay positive. At one point, his supervisor, Mr. Frome, even asks him for $5, and though Chris barely has anything, he still lends it to him. To make extra money, Chris donates blood. He uses the small amount he earns to buy the part he needs to fix his machine. Back at the shelter, his son asks if Linda left because of him. Chris assures him it's not his fault and tells him she just needed to find her own way. When Christopher calls him a good father, it clearly means the world to Chris. Not long after, he finally fixes the machine and sells it, earning just enough to spend a night in a real hotel. After some time, things start looking up again. Chris and his son go to the beach together, taking a break from all the stress. He's still struggling, but he's pushing through each day. On the final day of his internship, Chris shows up in a clean shirt and suit, hoping for good news. His supervisor, Jay, congratulates him for doing great work and for bringing in clients despite all his challenges. A few moments later, Chris is called into an office where Mr. Frome and other managers are waiting. They mention his new shirt, and when Chris explains it's because it's his last day, Mr. Frome smiles and says, "I'd like you to wear it again tomorrow." That's when Chris realizes he's been offered the full-time job. Overwhelmed with emotion, he thanks them, holding back tears. As he leaves, Mr. Frome even returns the $5 he borrowed. Chris walks out of the building, feeling a huge sense of relief and happiness. He rushes to his son's daycare, hugs him tightly, and tells him the good news. The film ends by showing that Chris eventually went on to start his own investment firm and became very successful. In the final scene, Chris and his son walk down the street, joking and laughing, and the real Chris Gardner passes by them, smiling. The story closes with a note saying that Chris later secured a multi-million-dollar deal.